Are genetically modified foods, called GMOs, safe for you and your family, as GMO promoters insist? Or are these lab-created foods actually frankenfoods, a distortion of what Mother Nature intended, and a ticking time bomb that will lead to an explosion of diseases and premature death? This is a very common herbicide that's used on GMO crops. I'm going to pour it into this vase because I want to show a quick demonstration. Ooh, it's powerful. All right, that ought to do it. Now, on your left is an organic ear of corn, grown as Mother Nature intended, completely free of toxic chemicals. On the right, this is an ear of corn that's been genetically modified in the laboratory to tolerate high levels of herbicides and pesticides. I'm going to dip this genetically modified ear of corn into this herbicide. All right. Now, I understand it doesn't appear that this GMO corn has been harmed. But let me ask you this question. Which of these would you eat? Which one would you serve to your family? To your children? That's an important question. Now that studies with lab animals show that just a 33% GMO diet can cause life-threatening diseases at the equivalent human ages of 10 to 50, with 50% of males dying prematurely and 70% of females dying prematurely. Today, our special report on genetically modified foods will answer all of your questions regarding the potential health hazards of GMO foods and also provide a solution. Recently, Newsmax Health conducted a survey, and the results surprised us. 85% of respondents were concerned about GMO foods, the pesticides sprayed on them, and also the chemical additives used in processed foods that can potentially lead to serious diseases. All of these topics are included in our presentation today, Cracking the GMO Code. And for starters, consider that genetically modified organisms, or GMO foods, were approved in 1994, and by 2003 were in wide use. But what few people know is that today, GMO foods represent 75 to 95% of America's biggest crops: corn, soybeans, sugar beets, potatoes, squash, papaya, vegetable oils, even farm-raised salmon. Now, we've been told that GMOs are safe for human consumption, but as you'll see in just a moment, no long-term studies support their safety, and in fact, show just the opposite. Today, we have the privilege of hearing from one of America's leading medical researchers and nutritionists, Dr. Russell Blaylock. Now, Dr. Blaylock is going to tell us what GMOs are, why they are rapidly invading our food supply, and most important, the disturbing results of the lifetime animal studies. And note I said lifetime studies because the World Health Organization only requires 90 days of testing to claim foods are safe. But when lab mice were fed a 33% GMO diet over their entire lifespan, which is typically 30 to 36 months, life-threatening diseases showed up as early as 4 months, and in very high numbers between 18 and 21 months. In human years, 4 months is about age 10, and 18 to 21 months is age 40 to 50. And all of the 90-day studies that proclaim GMO foods safe missed these important results. Well, the good news is that Dr. Blaylock has the facts for us as well as the solution. He has cracked the GMO code and has written a very easy-to-use booklet, Dr. Blaylock's Guide to Avoiding GMO Foods. With this guide, you will be able to identify and avoid GMO produce, as well as frozen, canned, bottled, boxed, and bagged foods that contain GMO ingredients. Now, you may already know that Dr. Blaylock is the author of several best-selling health books, as well as the popular editor of the Blaylock Wellness Report, the monthly health advisory letter with over 100,000 loyal readers. But let me tell you something about this medical hero that you may not know. Dr. Blaylock was trained at LSU School of Medicine. For 25 years, he was a highly regarded neurosurgeon practicing in major South Carolina and North Carolina hospitals. He's taught surgical procedures at medical schools, even co-invented an intricate neurosurgical procedure that's still used today. But his practice took a very dramatic turn after both of his parents contracted Parkinson's disease and then died when conventional medicine failed them. Of course, he was devastated, so Dr. Blaylock turned to medical research, focusing on the causes of diseases, something that's not taught in medical schools, nor researched at pharmaceutical companies for that matter. He soon discovered that the root causes of many diseases can be found in foods that have been genetically altered, foods that retain residues of herbicides and pesticides, and foods that contain harmful chemical additives. Now, you could call Dr. Blaylock a reluctant hero because although he had planned on a traditional medical career, he bravely spoke out when he discovered the truth was not being reported, and in fact, was being covered up. And that's when he started writing his monthly Blaylock Wellness Report, not only to report on the causes of illness and disease, but to provide effective, natural solutions. He also reports on bad medicine, which unfortunately is all too common. Now, today, Dr. Blaylock will give you the facts on GMO foods, and he'll show you what you can do to protect yourself and your family from the serious diseases and early death the animal studies show they can cause. Let's go to Dr. Blaylock now. Later on, I'll be back to the show to show you how to use his guide to avoiding GMO foods, and I'll also show you how to get your very own copy to use at your local grocery store.
Hello, I'm Dr. Russell Blaylock. What I want to talk about today is GMO foods and whether or not they're dangerous. This is a very important issue because so many foods now are genetically modified. And if it's not the actual food itself, it's ingredients from genetically modified foods. So let's take a look at the history of this. Now, by 1994, the government of the United States allowed them to introduce genetically modified foods into the food supply. This was initially just one or two foods. By 1998, that had increased to more foods. So by 2003, some 63% of crops in the United States were genetically modified. Now, you'll see the terms GMO and GM. The term GMO stands for genetically modified organism. GM is just genetically modified, so they're used synonymously. Today, the number of foods, depending on the food, that are genetically modified ranges from 73%, that's mainly for corn, to as high as 95%, which is the soy foods. So a lot of foods that are used in a lot of products are genetically modified. The idea of genetically modifying a plant basically is to make that plant resistant to disease or to insects. And that's because plants produce pesticides that kill the insect. It makes a natural pesticide. It also can make plants produce more of a certain protein, supposedly making it a healthier food. For instance, in a third world nation where protein deficiency is a big problem, if you had foods that produce more protein, that would be a good thing. So that was the idea behind genetically modifying them. It also can make plants resistant to herbicides. Many environmental groups have protested this. Some of these are very important and some are kind of questionable, but we'll cover the ones that are most important. What the most important thing about GMO foods is once you alter the gene in the plant, it cannot be reversed. So if you genetically modify a significant number of plants in your country and then it blows the seed over into other fields and cross-pollinates, then all of the plants become genetically modified, and eventually you could have 100% of all crops in the United States and the world genetically modified. And you cannot reverse that. You cannot go back to pure foods once that happens. So if problems arise, you're stuck with it. Now, basically, as we said, when you alter the genetics, for instance, if you want to make a plant that's more resistant to disease or insects, you insert a gene that causes that plant to produce higher levels of a natural pesticide, which we call phytoalexins. All plants produce these natural pesticides to protect themselves. Usually it's in a very low concentration, and it only secretes this when the plant is under attack by these diseases or by these insects. The problem with genetically inserting this is it produces much higher levels of these pesticide substances, and it produces it all the time. So that if you eat the plant, then you're getting very high levels of these phytoalexins, which are known to be carcinogenic. The other thing is they can make these seeds of the plant what they call a terminal seed. Basically what that means is when the plant is ready to seed, it no longer produces seed. This allows the company that makes the terminal seed to require the farmer to buy new seeds every year. Now what that means to you as a consumer is you're going to pay a lot more for your food.
Hi, we'll get back to Dr. Blaylock's presentation in just a moment, but first, I wanted you to know 3 key background facts. Number 1, across the nation, GMO companies have spent tens of millions of dollars defeating initiatives that would require GMO labeling. And as a result of that, no state currently requires labeling, and consumers are in the dark about what they're eating. Fact number 2. Recently, 2 million people around the world participated in a march against one of the leading GMO seed manufacturers to protest that company's aggressive policies to replace natural seeds with their patented GMO seeds. Fact number 3, one of the leading GMO seed makers not only sells patented seeds that farmers must purchase new each year, but they also make and sell the herbicides and pesticides that these crops use in larger quantities. What are GMO companies hiding? Why are millions of people protesting? Why do patented GMO seeds use more herbicides and pesticides? And most important, are we headed for a health crisis and don't even know it? Today, Dr. Blaylock will answer those questions and also give you a practical, easy-to-use solution in his conveniently sized guide booklet. This is going to be very important because a genetic modification has been made on our biggest crops to force the plants to produce a much higher level of its natural pesticide, and not just when under attack by insects, but continuously. And that's not all. The patented GMO seeds have been engineered to tolerate high levels of chemical herbicides and pesticides, enabling farmers to use large quantities of them without harming the plants, which in turn ensures a larger yield. But what about you? What about your family? What about your children? When you eat GMO produce or GMO frozen foods or packaged foods that contain GMO ingredients such as corn and soy, you do in fact ingest higher levels of plant and chemical pesticides, both of which are known carcinogens. In fact, when Dr. Blaylock resumes his presentation, you're going to see that the most serious diseases that just a modest GMO diet caused in the lab animals were aggressive cancers, and in particular, an explosion of breast cancers. Well, that is why Dr. Blaylock wrote his guide to avoiding GMO foods. And don't worry about taking notes today, because later on I'm actually going to show you how to obtain a free DVD video of Dr. Blaylock's full presentation today. Plus, you'll get a special offer that includes free copies of Dr. Blaylock's guide to avoiding GMO foods and his special report, Food Additives, What You Eat Can Kill You. Okay, when I come back, I'm going to show you how to use this small handy guide in your grocery store to identify and avoid GMOs, while at the same time making safe food choices. Right now, let's get back to Dr. Blaylock.
The other is what we call pesticide-ready type of genetically modified foods. And the idea here, and this is particularly in soybeans, what they do is they insert a gene that makes that plant resistant to herbicide, so that you can use much higher concentrations of herbicide around the plants and get rid of the weeds. The problem with that is when you use herbicide around plants that are edible, the plant will absorb some of that herbicide. It's been shown to be carcinogenic. That is, it can cause different cancers, particularly what we call lymphomas or leukemias, which are the fastest growing malignancies, particularly in people aged 30. So we see this as some issues that are quite serious. What does the research show when we look at what has been done to see just how dangerous these GMO foods are? Well, there's 2 parts to this research. One is the herbicides. Is the toxicity or the cancers that we're seeing due to the excess herbicides that's being used, or is it the genetically modified component of the plant itself? So what they did, they took some animals, usually rats or mice, and they would feed them a diet that consisted of about 11 to 33% GMO corn for 2 years. Now, the lifespan of a rat or a mouse is about 2.5, 3 years. So what we're doing is seeing a lifetime study. What happens when you consume GMO-type foods for an entire lifetime? And that's what we want to know. Well, they used control animals in which they fed natural corn, the non-GMO, and what they found is that if you feed animals a natural food, once they reach that 2 years limit, which would be in a human toward middle age, about 20% of the females will die and about 30% of the males will die. That's just their natural death rate. But if the animals are eating GMO corn, we see something very frightening. The death rate in the males more than doubles. It's 50%. And in the females, it's 70%. So we see almost a 2.5 times increase in death rate in both males and females consuming this GMO food. Most shocking is that these animals were dying prematurely even when they were eating the lower dose GMO food. So it's not a dose-related thing. A lot of toxins may not be that toxic if you're consuming a lower dose, only if you're consuming the higher dose. But here we found out even consuming the lower dose, they had premature death. The females that consumed the GMO diet died about at age 21 months, and the death rate was 6 times higher than those that were eating the normal diet. So it's a direct effect of the GMO gene insertion itself. The females were dying of breast tumors, and the males were dying of kidney damage. We explained that GMO can cause tumors. And the study in which they were feeding the animals the GMO foods, about 33% in their diet, which is equal to a human diet, when they fed them the low dose, they found that the females were producing these very malignant tumors. The ironic thing was that the size of the tumor, and these were massive breast cancers, the size of the tumor was not related to the dose. That is, a low dose produced just as many of these giant tumors as did the higher dose. So it's not dose related. The tumors occurred in females 5 times more often than the males. So it tends to occur in both. In other words, you'll see some males will develop breast cancer from it, but mainly it's occurring in the females. 90% of all tumors in the females were breast cancers, even though there were some other types of cancers. For instance, there were ovarian cancers in some of the females and skin cancers in both males and females. The tumors were unusual in that they were so enormous. I mean, these tumors were almost the size of the animal itself, and they grew so rapidly, became highly invasive type of tumors. This is quite unusual in agents that causes cancers. Interestingly, the majority of these tumors appeared after 18 months of feeding this GMO diet, which is important because the World Health Organization sets the study time at 90 days. That is, you watch the animal for 90 days, and if they seem to be healthy or if they get sick, you don't look at it after 90 days. Well, none of the animals developed any tumors within that period. They all developed them at 18 months or later. The earliest tumor was seen at 4 months, well beyond the 3-month limit set by the World Health Organization. So when you read articles, for instance, in scientific journals which said, well, we didn't find that, well, they stopped the study at that 3-month period. When you want to consider, well, how important is this to me? What is my chance of being exposed to these GMO crops? Well, 75% of all corn grown in the United States, for instance, is GMO-type corn. Many foods use corn ingredients, maltodextrin, corn sugars, corn flour, etc. The onset of the tumors in humans also would occur at a period that's equal to 18 months in a mouse, which is middle age in humans. So if humans are consuming this, say, from birth or from early in life, you wouldn't expect these massive tumors or rapid growing tumors to appear into middle age. Well, most of the people that's been eating these GMO foods in the world have not reached that point yet. So this is something we're going to see in the future, the very near future, whether or not there's going to be an explosion of breast cancers, ovarian cancers, and certain skin cancers. Essentially, we have not been eating this GMO food long enough to see these effects.
We'll get back to Dr. Blaylock in just one moment, but I wanted to emphasize a very important point. GMO crops have been genetically modified to tolerate much higher doses of herbicides and pesticides without harming the plants. And the reason is this ensures a larger yield for the farmer. But if the animal studies are any indication, these toxic chemicals, especially in these larger quantities, pose a serious health threat to consumers who eat GMO foods. Let me be clear on this. Before GMO foods were invented in the laboratory, the herbicides and pesticides had to be used sparingly or they would harm the plants. But then scientists genetically modified the plants so they would not be hurt by these larger doses of herbicides and pesticides. And conveniently, the GMO seed companies also make and sell the chemicals sprayed on the GMO crops. Now, that may be good for GMO companies and large growers, but what about your health? The health of your family, the health of your children. Let me demonstrate. This is one of the most commonly used pesticides on the market. And here are just a few popular corn products: chips, cereal, popcorn. Okay, we know 75% of all corn crops in the U.S. today are genetically modified GMOs, which means they use higher quantities of herbicides and pesticides on them. So, let's add the pesticide. Would you eat these foods? Would you serve them to your family, to your children? The answer is an obvious no, of course not.